So this is our presentation on adaptations to extreme environments and habitat fragmentation in urban environments by Jenna Smith and I.
So we're just going to start off by going through a quick outline of our presentation. First off, we're going to talk about what defines an urban environment. Then we'll talk about what habitat fragmentation is, what are extreme adaptations, how an urban environment is considered extreme. We'll go through 2 case studies and their links, and then 2 methods or ways to prevent habitat fragmentation. And then we'll just show our references and finish up.
So what defines an urban environment? The following qualities entail the presence of an urban environment. So they need the development of land. They provide man-made structures such as buildings, roads, railways, and bridges. They can be slightly variable in regard to their size. So they can be a large city, a small town, or even a suburb. And they are exclusively dominated by non-agricultural infrastructure.
What is habitat fragmentation? It's the process in which an animal's natural habitat is transformed from its original expanse into smaller patches of habitat that are then broken up and isolated by a multitude of habitats unlike the original. It can result in things like food scarcity, increased territory competition, low genetic diversity, and larger travel distances for resources.
So what are extreme adaptations? So an adaptation occurs when an organism reacts to its environment to better its chances of survival. There are 3 different types of adaptations, which are behavioral, physiological, and morphological adaptations. An extreme adaptation occurs when an organism adapts within an extreme environment, such as a desert or city. So a couple examples of extreme adaptations would be birds using cigarette butts and nests to repel parasites, rats eating fast foods, and blackbirds changing the pitch of their calls due to noise pollution.
So how is an urban environment considered extreme? Well, these environments often create harsh living conditions for organisms. Some ways in which this environment is extreme includes the creation of habitat fragmentation and degradation, food scarcity, territory competition, the production of toxic substances, and the production of litter, and many others.
So for our first case study, we'll be covering some research done in the common field grasshopper. So when this grasshopper is inhabiting an urban environment, it was found to undergo morphological adaptations when compared to its rural populations to better survive in the extreme environment. Because cities have developed, there's a fragmentation of vegetation that is present, and this vegetation is required for the grasshopper's survival, thus its habitat is being fragmented. To cope with longer distances between food sources and territory, the urban grasshoppers were found to have longer wings, longer femurs, and a lower abdominal mass when compared to its rural variant. This adaptation allows the grasshopper to become better at navigating from place to place, thus better at moving to different vegetation patches within cities.
So now to talk about the first main link for our 2 topics. Case study 1 specifically depicts the main link of urban areas and the way they create extreme habitat fragmentation. To cope with this, the organisms must adapt. The grasshopper underwent a small but significant adaptation in order to survive in its new extreme environment. The fragmentation of vegetation means that the organism either needed to become better at traveling from each patch or change their diet.
The second case study we're going to be talking about is research done on the hawk's beard plant. So in the French city of Montpellier, a study was done on the hawk's beard plant to determine why their seed size was changing. The plant originally produces a plethora of small seeds that parachute themselves to the air and wind to find a place to germinate when growing in more rural environments. The study of this plant was done on individuals that were growing along streets and sidewalks in an urban area with limited soil. It was observed that the plants growing in this environment dropped large, heavy seeds that fell to the base of the mother plant, essentially to ensure the offspring had viable soil to germinate in.
Okay, and our second main link, this plant underwent a morphological adaptation in order to better survive in its new environment. Urban areas often do not have the same quality or quantity of soil as rural areas. Thus, seed dispersal via wind is not as efficient. Plants that disperse their seeds within the small patch of unusable habitat will do better than those that waste their seeds by spreading them in areas that they can't grow, such as roadways. There is a fragmentation of habitat that affects the species range, thus they need to adapt accordingly.
So now we're going to talk about methods of prevention and ways to combat habitat fragmentation. So one way to prevent habitat fragmentation from occurring is to prevent the need for it to occur in the first place. So as mentioned, habitat fragmentation can cause an organism to undergo extreme adaptations. In an effort to mitigate the effects of habitat fragmentation for organisms living within an urban setting, humans have created two ways for animals and plants to survive as naturally as possible.
The first prevention method is wildlife corridors. A wildlife corridor is a bridge or a tunnel used to provide safe travel for animals between their areas in which they inhabit. By doing so, it eliminates the risk of roadkill and the limiting of resources that the urban environment can create.
The second prevention method are green spaces. So, a green space is essentially a naturalized area that animals can use as habitat and refuge since the urban environment reduces available resources and territory. In a city, this could consist of planting trees and vegetation on roadways, leading from green space to green space.
And that wraps up our presentation. Below are listed our references for both the written text and the pictures.